Welcome to the Releasing Community podcast. This is where we share our love for releasing and the Sedona method, and we share our gains, insights, experiences, and benefits. I am Katja Törmänen, and I will be hosting this podcast with Stephen Robert Carlson.
Nice to be here with you.
Nice to have you, Stephen. And today our guest is Wei-Hin Jan. The Sedona method found Wei 17 years ago during a pre- and postpartum crisis. Since then, she has been using the method and recognizes it's one of the most powerful tools for living your life fully, wholly, and fully too. Since working in healthcare for 3 decades, she is now pivoted to full-time coaching as a certified co-action coach. Well, welcome, Wei, and so lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for starting this. This is quite the vision, and it's such a incredible tool for the community. And I'm just so delighted to be here today. I am so appreciative of the opportunity to be with you and to share my moment with the Sedona Method community, the releasing community at large.
Yes, it is. It's a pleasure to get to know all the people a little bit more. So let's start with the question we start with everyone. So you already mentioned it was 17 years ago and you had a kind of a crisis going on in your life, but how did you find the Sedona method, or how did it find you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always feel like it found me. So during my second pregnancy, I really struggled with, especially into my second and third trimester, I really struggled with just really strange symptoms and all purpose, basically I was having psychotic episodes where I was having visions and hearing sounds that weren't there. So as an example, I would walk to work and I would hear a fire alarm. I live right downtown Toronto. So there's ambulances, police sirens going on all the time. And so this is not something new. And I'll be walking to work and I would hear a siren, and the siren is, a good 2 blocks away. But all of a sudden I would be overcome with the visions. It's almost like the accident is right in front of me. And it was pretty brutal. Like I had some pretty brutal visions. I would go to the mall, which is something that I do all the time. For example, if I had a really tough day at work, the mall is right. I worked in a hospital and there's a big mall that's like less than 2 minutes walk. And it's a pretty busy mall. I would go there to grab my lunch or to grab myself a little tea or whatnot. And I would go into the mall, and it'll be very crowded. Nothing that I haven't dealt with before. And I would just feel overcome. And I learned that basically I developed panic attacks. I've always dealt with anxiety and depression, but this was escalating very quickly with nothing that was acutely wrong other than I was pregnant. So my body and mind really had a hard time adjusting during my second pregnancy. So then I went, I got connected to the prenatal mental health team, really famous, amazing hospital here in Toronto, Mount Sinai Hospital. And I met a social worker who taught me how to do letting go. Right. And just checking in and, to do the whole safety, security, check that I'm actually not in the midst of that accident, even though I really felt like I was, once I heard that siren. So moments like that. And then after I gave birth, they couldn't see me anymore because, Canadian healthcare is amazing, but it also has its limitations. So she referred me to Dr. Karen Klepecki, and we're very familiar with her because she's one of the Sedona Method instructors. She then, in those days, she was running weekend courses. So I signed up for a basic course, and I basically introduced it to like my husband and my closest friends. They all went. And I basically started using it more intensely. So initially it got me, the releasing got me through the issues that I was having with pre and postpartum depression. I think that's the umbrella term is, depression, but it was more than a depression, right? Because I was having visual and hearing. I was having experiences that weren't real. And then from there, I started doing a few more courses with Karen. I did a few of her retreats. She tends to keep her retreats very small, and I just started bringing it to work. In those days, I was working as a physiotherapist, and so it was really helpful because I could hold my patient's hand and we could walk through the pain that they were experiencing after surgery, after trauma, after whatever they were going through, and I was able to walk them through the discomfort, the post-surgical discomfort, and then stop walking, and it'll be like, wow, this is pretty magical. This is really amazing. I know it's not magic, but I use the word magic very generously in the sense that I do think it's magic. Simple things like post-operatively, taking a deep breath is really hard for people, right? After you've had the tube, some people in the ICU, same thing. And I would just go in there and I was able to actually release my concerns for me as a clinician, but also my worries and my blocks. Sometimes some of these things are very traumatic and they can really trigger a lot of our own stories and our own fears. So I would release my own fears before I would touch a patient. And I just developed this really weird but amazing reputation as the person who can come into a room and calm a patient, and it's really great. And as a clinician teacher, I also developed this reputation where I would get sent all the more difficult students, if you know what I mean. The ones that everybody wants to fail because they're not safe, they shouldn't be touching patients. You work through them, and a lot of that was me releasing and then me creating a space for them to also be real with their own fears, right? And then from a clinician, I moved on. I kind of survived the whole SARS thing. I was one of the first clinicians in the ICUs to don the whole thing, right? SARS was really bad for us, especially being Asian in Toronto. You go into the subway and everybody's like, oh my God, you brought a SARS. So that was really important because honestly, after spending a day treating people in the ICU, the last thing I want to do is going to the subway and being accused and the looks. I mean, it would be easy for me to get into a rage, but I didn't get into a rage. I didn't get into fights. I didn't engage with people. Why? Because I was releasing every moment, anything that came my way, I was releasing, right? So by the time I came home, I was able to be the kind of wife, the kind of mother, the kind of person, the kind of woman that I know I can be because I'm not bringing all that crap home. And then after my days as a clinician, I did some admin work and I did a lot of project management. And every time, basically I am mapping out a project, I release through it. I use the Sedona method to set goals, to set the vision, release through whatever comes up within myself. Then I go and, my presentations will go pretty easily. Again, because I'm showing up without all of these hooks, with all of these things that weigh you down as a human being, right? And then I ended up running a program, a research program, and I know that at one of the Sedona Hales retreats, I did share that I would come to the Sedona retreats, and it would be Sedona. It's a few hours behind Toronto. I would pull in a good 4 or 5 hours before the Sedona Method retreat starts. So I'll get a good chunk of work done. And I remember specifically one of the trips, I had a really terrible project. It was a $5 million project. We got the grant, but we had 3 incredibly egotistical parties. And I'm sitting in the Sedona Method. I am needing to move the contracts forward. And I couldn't. I showed up and we were at a stalemate. As the retreat progresses, 75% of the contracts are done. in terms of agreements, right? So I'm giving you the whole story. You asked me how I came about Sedona Method. I've given you the whole trajectory of how I came about it and how I've used it as a person, as an individual, as a professional, as a woman. And then now I'm here. I have completely pivoted away from working specifically in healthcare and bringing it to as many people as I can, because I really do think that is a very powerful tool.
Oh, it is a powerful tool. Well, that's an impressive history. You've got it. That was really, that was amazing. You got it. You actually learned it from a health care person yourself. So you were kind of continuing the same legacy and giving it forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's quite a journey you described, and I can't really, I just can't imagine what it's like to have those kinds of reactions to sirens and the intensity of that, and then to work through that.
I as I said, you'll hear me say again and again, Sedona Method saved my life. You know, there's no question about it. I wish I knew about it when I was 16. So I bring it to people. I do a lot of pro bono work with the vulnerable population, because part of it is I do think that it is such a powerful tool. It absolutely, Sedona Method saved my life. And maybe it's too much information, but I ended up getting pregnant again. And so I have 3 kids. So even with a terrible experience with my second pregnancy, with the pre and post difficulties, was pregnant again. And of course, right away, I was scared. Am I going to experience even worse symptoms? Because they do say that sometimes things get worse, right?
Yeah.
And I think because I had the Sedona Method, sort of within me, and I was using it so regularly, I dare say that my 3rd pregnancy was the best pregnancy ever. I was just giddy, happy, and it was just phenomenal. And in fact, I used the Sedona Method, the releasing, throughout my labor, throughout my active labor, right? And it was definitely pretty amazing. I had natural birth with the other 2 as well. And the 3rd one, natural birth with the Sedona Method. And, and I know, we say Sedona Method does not, diagnose, does not treat. And I'm not at all proposing that it can replace any kind of medical care or psychiatric care. But it is definitely a really good complements really, really, really well. And even recently, the last 5 years, health-wise, has been pretty terrible for me. I've had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of different workouts, workups, exams, and all of that for some pretty terrible, scary diagnoses. And I think that just by virtue of some of the workups that I needed, I think very easily, if I didn't have my Sedona Method toolkit, I do feel like each of those tests that I had to go through will probably have sent me into some kind of a panic disorder, panic attack, but I didn't. And, through releasing, I'm finding that my healing journey has just been more steady. There's a lot of peaks and valleys, but I have felt pretty steady throughout the last 5 years, in spite of everything else that's been going on. So it's very special.
It's a massive gain you just described. That's a beautiful story.
Yes, it is. And I definitely think there are many places in life when releasing would have been tremendous help if I had known it sooner. I've never given thought about giving birth, but definitely yes. And all the things, it can be a scary journey, that whole trip. But yeah, that is a beautiful story.
Can I share another area of gain?
Yes, please do.
Because I'm just not sure that I've shared this openly in the retreats. my mom had dementia. My mom got diagnosed with dementia, and I just want to tell you that the Sedona method releasing is a really powerful tool as a caregiver.
Mm.
So we know that we are apparently apparent beings, right? We're in our physical bodies, we have our energies, we have our emotions. We also know that when we are close to each other, we have this unsaid interaction energetically that just happens, right? And I had been experimenting with the Sedona method around how I just affect my immediate surrounding when I was on the subway, because in the Toronto area, subways can be pretty, not as bad as New York, but they can be quite the adventure. And we have a lot of different personalities, and sometimes it's a safety issue. So I learned there years ago on just sort of managing my energy when there's something or someone that potentially could pose the inner peace that I like to hold on to, right? So with that, I brought that practice with me when I went to see my mom. So I used to take Fridays off I used my vacations. I would spend Fridays with her. And, I would sit down on the street in my car before I went into her house, and I would just do releasing. And I would go spend time with my mom, and it would be the most phenomenal time. She couldn't remember a ton of things, but it was phenomenal. Like, love was present. We were connecting. I was, able to be present with her. And by my being present and my sitting in love and peace and acceptance, something would unlock in her. And in a way, it's almost like she had no choice but to dip her toes into love, acceptance, and peace, And what is really phenomenal for me, and I bring this to some of my coaching, if my clients are working around their legacy, is this idea of shifting the stories. My mom is survived the Japanese War, and her memories of her childhood was just terrible trauma. And then as I'm sitting there and I'm working with her, well, I'm not really working with her, but being with her was amazing in terms of how her stories shifted from this trauma where she would immediately feel like the panic that I felt when I was having those issues. Like the minute she would remember being a little girl in the village, the bombs coming, like it's like she was living that moment. Okay. We went from that to, again, releasing, just acknowledging what she's feeling. We went from that automatic trauma, like that trigger of like, she's there. You could see, you look at her body, she's there. She's running into the ditches. She's there. She's scared. She's a cowering little girl. She went from that, telling stories that way, all the way through to me discovering some really amazing, beautiful moments that she had as a child. Stuff that I never had access to before because she had forgotten it, okay? The next thing I know, I hear about her having a lychee garden, a pond full of fish, in front of her house. Like, my grandfather was a beekeeper, and so she was able to describe to me like how my grandfather built the bee the box, right? And all of that. But none of that was ever accessible to me until I started sitting with her and really sitting with her stories and sitting with everything that came up and all of that personalization that we talk about. That like in the moment she would be in that ditch, listening for the bombs dropping on her village, right? Seeing body parts and stuff like that. And going from that to towards the end of her life, to be able to hear about all these other aspects of her life that she never talked about because they were never accessible. They were just so hidden in the trauma, right? So, this calling of bringing this kind of space to other people it's very, in a way, I know it sounds like it's very personal. It's not personal to me. It's always felt the thing that I do. Like even when I was a little girl, it was always about, like helping people, right? Being a physiotherapist, I would be the physio that got the most difficult patients, right? The difficult students, right? This idea of creating space and just holding this space. But I had to go through it myself. I had to unlatch and I had to unhook a lot of my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I dare say that after 17 years, I am more, even though my physical health is worse, I would say that my beingness is more accessible, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
I just, one thing I noticed when you were talking about this, your mother, is that, so you kind of had a hesitation. I was working with her, but no, I wasn't working with her. And really what it is that being with her and just allowing her and welcoming all of it. And what you said is this unlocked for you all of your mother's childhood memories and so forth. But I just have to say it also unlocked those for her. And what an enormous gift.
100%. 100%. And I think that I feel that in terms of what I'm doing now around being a coactive coach, and using the Sedona method and introducing the Sedona method to my clients, like it's been really interesting and it's very different. Like I always brought the Sedona method to my staff, my meetings and my projects and stuff like that, right? Even my one-on-one meetings, it was always about, okay, let's just be curious about what is going on with you. I felt like I was more like a guerrilla gardener, like, it was very sort of, on the down low, but then now very formally, I have this tool that, I'm not certified in, but I've used it. I've personally gained from it. Would you like to experience it? And then it's been pretty phenomenal. It's not for everybody because a lot of people are like me 17 years ago, very head heavy, right? And so the journey of integrating into the body and then into the beingness, some people can do it overnight, but I'm finding that a lot of people need a little bit more guidance and time, right? And so now when I take myself to Hales retreats and we're talking about this is all just apparently happening and none of it is real, it resonates deeply because it's exactly what I've always known, but didn't have the words or didn't have the system to support that. I've always had this sense that I am not the body. I am not the story. I am not the displaced new Canadian who doesn't belong, right? So it's like none of it matters, right? And yet it does matter because that's how we live life. So it's been really interesting to now then come to people and hold a space and say, yeah, knowing that it's just a story. None of it really matters at the end of the day. However, it is so critical for that individual in that moment. And so to hold that space and to give them the courage, the love, the acceptance to explore whatever they need to explore, for them to then kind of come to the space of, wow, look at that. I am not my thought. I am not my panic. I'm not my anxiety. I'm not my fear. I'm not my failure, right? Kind of be able to kind of just parse that out is really phenomenal. It's a real privilege.
I totally agree with that. And back to the dementia part, when you shared about your mom, I had the same, not as severe experience. My mom didn't go through the war, but she had dementia, and she also had her suffering stories. And there were times when she really lived them, and they were things that had happened 30 years, 40 years, 60 years ago. Releasing, I didn't get as far all the time as you did, but kind of really noticing the difference that it made if I was releasing while seeing her, and when I wasn't, there was a clear difference how it went. And exactly the love that I remember the first time she didn't remember who I was. And that was, of course, painful. But I could still see that she didn't know who I was, but there was still love. And that was so kind of beautiful to be there and like, okay, it doesn't matter if she doesn't remember my name or the kind of a connection we apparently have. It doesn't matter. She loves me, and there's love. And that was kind of one of the gifts of that time. But is that that when you're sharing this with clients, you have this other modality you're using, coactive coaching? Was that it?
Yeah. So coactive coaching is a
modality or way.
It's a specific coaching theory.
Mm-hmm.
And all it is a framework. It brings in a lot of different, it has many different pillars, and a lot of them work very well with the various tools that we know from the Sedona method. But one of the pillars, one of the anchors is that we walk into these coaching relationships. First of all, is coactive, meaning that I am not doing anything other than holding space for the client, right? Which is beautiful. It takes a lot of pressure off. But one of the pillars that I really love is to walk in, and we believe that our clients are naturally resourceful to be their own best solution, finder. So again, like, I am not doing anything. I love that. I mean, even when I was a physio, when I was physically lifting patients out of bed and holding them when they're walking, I still didn't really feel like I was doing it. Do you know what I mean? It was sort of like I always felt held. It's like, well, who's holding me? It's taken me 30 years after, being in the ICU, working with spinal cord injuries, head injuries, and all of that, to kind of go, oh yeah, now I understand who was holding me, because it was kind of interesting, right? Like, going in there and touching patients' lives and kind of doing things and then not feeling like I was the one doing it. Now I have the words for it thanks to the Sedona method. Coactive is the certification process. It was very involved. And it's CTI, is through CTI, and the designation you get is CPCC. So it's a certified professional coactive coach, right? And it's with the CTI, which is a Coaches Training Institute, which is like one of the oldest American coaching organizations. Yeah. And funny enough, I have a story. The reason I went to CTI is because I remember showing up at the first facilitation retreat, peer-to-peer. I think that's what Hale called it. And I remember showing up there because I had an inclination, I had an aspiration that I wanted to bring the Sedona method to the masses. Okay, so I show up. And we do this facilitation, training, and Hale tells us, go out there, spread it out. And I asked, because I know I've met a ton of people who are certified Sedona coaches, right? Certified instructors. So I asked him, I said, what are you thinking? I had envisioned that I would, retire from my clinical practice and my hospital leadership practices, and sort of this would be my retirement. And he's like, oh, I don't know. And I talked to people who were certified, and there wasn't really a process, and it didn't look like there was going to be a process set up anytime soon. And at this time, I was leading a research program, and I was hiring a lot of coaches for our scientists, right?
Mhm.
One of them set me down and said, have you ever thought of being a coach? Because I see that you're coaching people, and I can very clearly see the reason you're bringing me in is because you need a coach. I go 100%, because if I'm a manager or leader, I can't also coach people.
Mhm.
Because sometimes that can be a little bit weird, but I definitely bring in a coaching approach. And then so she recommended that I look into getting certified, and I kind of went, thank you, universe. Now I can hit, right? I can go through the process, and I've already done the facilitation training. I can now bring Sedona Method more formally, even though I'm not a Sedona Method certified coach or instructor. I've done the work, and Hale has told us bring it to people, right?
Yeah.
And so now that he is, set up this mentorship, I'm absolutely delighted, because I feel like any opportunity to augment the formality of a structure or anything for the body me to bring it more formally out, I would love that. But at the same time, I also realize that I don't necessarily need any other certification to actually share it, because I have been doing it. I am teaching it to people. It's all cool. The other tools that I mean, I've got other tools in my thing, because I've been a seeker for a long time. So I'm also an Akashic record reader, and that's a really fascinating thing to be doing with people.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Akashic record. It's sort of like, the belief system of your soul is predetermined, has a predetermined journey, right?
Yep. Yes.
But predetermined in a sense that it's not so predetermined that you can come, you have this book that, sort of can, you have teachers, you have this, you can tap into the light, what we call in Sedona Method, the beingness, right? You have your teachers, but then, the Akashic record is more around holding the space for people to possibly make the decision to change the course of what they think is their fate.
Yes.
Right? Now, we know that none of it matters, but sometimes these structures really help to kind of go, wait a second. Do you want to change that? Right? And then, sort of building that, bringing whatever that's been unconsciously driving people, bringing it more into like the conscious awareness, and then making some key decisions and actions around that.
Would it be accurate to say you're talking about working with people's stories or helping them to edit?
It's all stories.
Yeah.
It's all stories. I mean, really, even my mom, right? It's all stories. It's just we move from extremely traumatizing stories to happier stories about bees and lychee gardens and all of that, right? It's all stories.
I remember at some point before finding the Sedona Method, I was really into all sorts of things, like many of us are. And then there were, all these past life experiences and blah, blah, that seemed fascinating, and, so many stories to dwell on. And I used to have these pictures of me doing this or that somewhere. And then I came to the point when I kind of realized that I have absolutely no way of ever making sure this is true, but I don't care. Like, if I'm doing this now and I'm having some issue in my life now, and then I go and look for guidance or whatever, and I get this picture or story that's past life oriented or whatever, does it matter? Like, it helps me this moment. I'm not going around in my life telling everybody that, I used to be this or that, or it doesn't affect my daily life in anything else except that at this moment, I got this lovely story. It made me feel better. It made me see where to go next. That's it. And that helped me let go of the attachment to those stories and them being true and meaningful and really important. So yeah, I think it really is. It's all stories. That's a wonderful thing to notice.
Mm-hmm.
But you were talking about sorry, were you going to say something? You were talking about how the Sedona method isn't for everyone. Like some people need to be kind of led to it more kindly or gently, or need more instruction. So how do you notice that, or how can you tell from the start to whom you offer it, or do you test it with everyone first?
I think it's safe to say that I introduce it to everybody, and I think that the Sedona method has enough tools, and I'm comfortable with it enough that I can find something that will land. One of the ways that I find most success is by using metaphors with people. So using the storytelling brain, right? Using the storytelling brain, I can find a metaphor that will work with someone and then use that metaphor to bring them into sort of like the more Sedona method. Sometimes it is as simple as, do you notice that? And when you notice that as a block, so the other day, for example, I did actually, let's not go into that. The other day I used the metaphor of someone who I discovered in our chat really loved driving, right? And they love driving in an open road. So then it's like, whoa, well, what happens when you're like, like the music is going, you're driving, you're bopping along, and then all of a sudden there's this, stop sign, right? So like using that metaphor around some of the core self-limiting beliefs being the stop sign, right? And then so in that moment, in that stop sign, bringing in all these other things that they came into coaching as being the thing that they want to fix, right? So in that moment, to really have that, let's notice it. And welcoming is a little bit weird for myself and for a lot of people that I work with, but noticing is something that I think a lot of people are resonant with, right? And then just sort of noticing that, and then sometimes pop right into, could you let it go? Would you? When? But so important to let people know that no is a fine answer. And you can usually tell that pretty quickly because people will like, they'll go into the head. It's like, and you got to stop them, right? Stop them going into the head and kind of go, no, it's fine, but not maybe. I want a yes or no, right? And so that's when I kind of get into a little bit more of the controlling piece around, let's just yes, no, and then I might have to stop and do a bit of education around the limbic system and and how it connects to the frontal brain. And really the only thing that makes us superhuman, like humans, above all animals, is this frontal brain, right? And so how do we access a frontal brain, right? We're run with our limbic system. This is where all our hurt is, our reptilian brain, our automatic, our fight or flight. So then kind of bringing them in here. And so in that story, in that feel it in your body, and I do a lot more feel it in your body than Hale likes, but it's what I bring to the world, and it's my physio in me kind of thing, right? So, feeling it into the body and really getting in touch, and you'll be amazing at how that little bit can help people kind of go, oh my gosh, that's where my story lives. It lives here in this pain that I always feel when I have to go visit my mother-in-law or I have to go see my boss, right? That kind of thing is like, oh, that's my indigestion. That's where it lives. To be able to identify that and then to kind of simply, could you let it go? No, great. Hold on to it. Hold on to it even tighter, right? So working through that. And then sometimes it's more sort of like the more advanced tools, right, around the metaphysical stuff, around when people are ready to be the light, to be the being, to be the love, right? And if that's the case, then we can go right into the fifth way, right into deep diving into whatever they identify with, that they're resonant with, because we all have different experiences, right? Some people see big spaces, some people see light, some people don't see anything other than just they feel lighter, they feel like the whole body's vibrating. So if that's where they're at, we can take them there, right? Some people can't even go there, it's just head. So the coaching is just head, it's just head.
Mhm.
And so with them, it's like, can't even kind of go, what are you feeling? What feelings? What are those? and I know that very well, because like as a Chinese woman, right? You can feel proud or you can feel embarrassed. And it's not even I feel proud. Have I made my parents proud, or have I embarrassed my parents, right? So it's like, I get it. So it's all walks of life. It's all types of people. Just in the head, I've got a career path and this is what I am doing. I've got a spreadsheet. I've got my outcomes to me. With that, it's just breathing. I go back to basics, to my physio training. In that moment, breath. In that breath, what do you notice? I notice that I'm panicked, and they'll say that the panic is a story and it's all heavy in the head, right? Failure. I'm not going to meet my quarterly numbers. My VP is not going to be happy with me, or my CEO is not going to be happy with me, right? Right. So it's story, story, story. So then you access it in the back way. So it's not at all about could you, would you, when. It's softer. Advantage of that. What's the disadvantage of that? Right? But it's here, it's in the head, which I don't love. But there's still some Sedona tools that can help you with that. Right? A little bit of the goal process around, having them define, so how is this a problem? And what would they like to change about it? And then having a discussion around the changes, they may not be ready to hear the words wanting control, wanting security, all of that, but you can ask them questions that connect them to their wanting security. You can ask them questions to connect them to wanting control, right? So having a lot of conversations before you can kind of go, did you notice? Or notice what came up a lot is a theme of wanting control. And some people do not ever want to let go of the control. So then do you notice that? And where else have you seen that? So then this is when I lean back onto my coactive, a little bit of storytelling, right? Mm-hmm. So connecting the dot until they are, actually it's not really even they, that we as a container, the two of us are more familiar, like a pattern emerges, right? And then so now we can talk about the pattern. Again, another story, right? But then that's the theme of the story. And then bringing in storytelling and going, this is a story, this is a chapter. Are they ready to close that chapter? Are they ready to change the theme, right? So the background is very much around that beingness, the wholeness, that peace, that all accepting. The tools are a little bit different, depending on the case.
There's one thing I'd like to ask you, because you told us of some very important areas of your life where you've experienced gain. There was the pregnancy. Even you could say it sounds a little bit like PTSD, and then also the relationship with your mother was just glorious. I just wondered, what kind of clients or issues do you attract? Anything related to these issues? Do you work with people on issues of pregnancy, for example?
Yeah, so I actually just finished a certification in women's neuropsychophysiology.
Wow.
Because we're different.
Mm.
Men are like the sun, rises a certain time, sets a certain time, 24-hour cycle. Women, we are distinctly four physiologically different individuals in any given cycle, right? So I've been using a lot of that. I'm running, I'm opening up that space because part of it is just this feminine consciousness rising that I feel like I've been sort of swept in really and carried with, right? Um, so I'm finding a lot of that. My coaching clientele is a lot of women, who are struggling with finding their leadership voice in a system like this. So in many ways, I feel like it's the me that faced the glass ceiling and then the bamboo ceiling, right? I am meeting and I'm not only coaching people of color. I am coaching. I'm open to a lot of people, but I'm finding that my niche is, women who are stuck early on, young people who are like, I've graduated, I've got this phenomenal job, but I hate it. I hate it. I don't understand that because I've always loved what I've done, right? So that's a
Wow.
different twist. But what's similar there is being, the woman who had to find a different way to express herself because she never felt like she belonged, right? A lot of women going through transitions. And interestingly, I do find myself connected to young men who are facing a lot of issues with their mothers,
Ah,
who, by the way, is my husband. So this thing around like the question that you asked, like I do find that there's opportunities for me to relive a lot of my stories and then almost having like a redo with love and kindness and acceptance. Lots of young parents who are really struggling because now, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of young kids being diagnosed with a lot of behavioral things, and I don't know what that is. People are telling me diagnostics are better, awareness is better, all of that, right? But our enabling each other to have a neurodivergent child hasn't necessarily entered into the mass consciousness, right? So I'm finding myself in those spots. I have normies, as kids, but I do think that we're all neurodivergent to some degree, but none of us have any specific diagnosis, like in terms of my family, right? But like living through that has also been interesting. Yeah, so I definitely have a good magnet for people who are coming through with my similar life experiences, but also I am meeting people who have different kind of life challenges. For example, some of the women I discover later on in our relationship, in our coaching relationship, is in fact they have a dysfunction with food, right? And that's not something that I've personally experienced, right? But for whatever reason, as we're journeying together, it's coming up. And like I went through a period there where bam, 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 like, things came up and I kind of went, whoa. And I had to, call my an old office mate, a registered dietitian that I shared an office with, and I needed her to sit me down and give me a rundown of, the different approaches, what's available, and all the different resources that I could send my clients to, because I couldn't help them with that, but I can certainly help them with that story around how did they get to where they got to, right? And empowering them, going from that subconscious to consciousness of this is what I like now moving forward, right? And then the opportunity is also there for me around the guilt and the shame of not having the tools to immediately be able to help someone who is making such an important and vulnerable share, right? So in the moment, the Sedona method helps me to get in touch with my shame and guilt, because you all have heard me, like I've got this incredible propensity for perfectionism. I've got this incredible, I think, of everybody, I have the biggest fear of failure, right? Of course. So like right there, the idea is like, like feeling like I got hit in the gut, right? First of all, like I didn't have a sense of this being a massive gremlin on my client's back, right? And then getting in touch with myself around, food insecurities and how I was raised. I think part of it is that I got in touch with the fact that growing up in Africa, I didn't have the luxury of developing any kind of eating disorders, because it was rare, like honestly, like, right? And when I moved to Canada, by that time, it was like, it didn't matter. Like I'll go play football, come off the field, and I was one of these kids that could eat half of Mars bars and put the other half back in my gym bag. And it was just a thing. Like I just needed the quick sugar thing. I didn't ever have to eat a whole bag of chips or anything like that, right? So when I'm meeting these people who are like, I can never have a muffin because I can't stop at one muffin. I need to eat a dozen of it. I can't have a donut because I'm going to have a whole dozen of it. So it's like the fear of eating something that is so delicious, right? I can have a lot of compassion for that, but I don't understand it.
Right.
Right? I don't understand it. And I don't understand being gripped with like the fear of going into restaurants because then you're going to overeat. Right? Yeah.
Well,
So,
I started thinking, do you think it's better or worse that you don't understand? And I thought that it might be actually even better that you don't go into your own story or history while you're helping them.
Yeah, 100%. And even when I've had that experience, with my training around coactive, it's very much not about me, right? Yeah. So, I think that you're right. It's probably a fake sense of security that I can dip into compassion a little bit faster because I know the story. But really, at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with me. Yeah. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. And it's always about what the client is showing up with. So in coactive, we talk about it as being the big A agenda item. It's the, big A, capital A. It's the client, shows up with a capital A agenda, right? It's their agenda item, 100%, yeah, and I think that's just the important thing. I don't know, Katya, that there's a better or worse. I don't think any of it matters at the end of the day, because it's just about, I see myself as being I guess the container that holds whatever that comes up. And sometimes I am the container that, is very small to kind of contain very big things into sort of like making it a little bit smaller, right? Sometimes, it's my job to kind of stretch the container so more can come into the container and then just sort of like kind of go, okay, well, I'm going to push this side. And what do you see? What does that do? I'm going to sort of like push this side. What do you see? And sometimes it's like, take the whole bowl or take the whole container and kind of go, this is bullshit. Pour it out. Let's start again. Right. So I have not had a single coaching session repeat itself.
Yeah. I totally get it. Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Well, the beauty of the method is that you don't have to have an affinity or an experience or shared experience with the other person in the sense that I've been through that and so forth. It's, however, very often the case that if we've been dealing with topics in great detail on our own, using ourselves as the laboratory, then yeah, we end up having a lot to say on those particular topics. Yeah.
And I think the challenge there is, and I'm going to use the word challenge because part of it is in coactive we spend a lot of time talking about self-management, right? So the propensity is there, the magnet is there, like I've primed the magnet, for the issues that I face. So the magnet is primed. I don't know in the next little while that I can really avoid perimenopausal issues and, like women in their 50s wondering about, where they're going to be with their career, and young women who are really struggling with, this is not really what I wanted to do, but I needed to do something that was stable, blah, 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 right? And then, the piece around, whatever, like my magnet is primed. I'm going to attract that kind of BS story, right? The self-management component is really in that call to know that the hook is there. So the Sedona method perspective is that the Velcro, the hook is there, right? And I can very easily, for sure, personalize it and make it all about me. Oh yeah, I remember, I remember what my CEO told me when that happened, blah, blah, blah. Very easy, my brain could go there. But the self-management part and the training is kind of to sit back, right? And using the Sedona method is to be able to pull back and to kind of go depersonalize that, right? And then the coactive component is like, this is not about me, right? And then, but the experience, what it brings to coactive coaching around the experience is being able to ask the questions to help the client go a little bit deeper in connecting with that story that they're showing up with, right? It's being able to then identify the different characters and ask, give them questions so that way they can identify the different characters that are in their story, the theme, the whole sort of like how the story unfolds, right? That's where the personal experience comes in. Just being able to kind of point to here, point to there, point to here, and then they come up potentially with hope. Potentially, often it does end up being a shifted understanding that they're not the villain in the story, or if they are the villain in the story, they could choose to be maybe a different character. If they were showing up as a victim, what do they want to do with that? Maybe sometimes it's not right into the hero of the story, but maybe just play a different character. And okay, for your next meeting with your VP or CEO or whatever, you show up within that character, right? And in a way, that's a bit of a method too, right? When you're shifting, within you can sort of letting go of this character that I've been playing so well, and now I'm going to try this character. And when we shift people into this different character, there's a little bit more of that beingness, because part of it is going from here to here. There's just that bit of that consciousness of, I don't have to be stuck over here in my little story. I can go a little bit more and try a little bit more of an expanded version of that, right? And then you move them along. And I say move them along. There really isn't any moving along. Sometimes they come back and it's worked really, really well. Sometimes it comes back and it's completely flopped. Great. Absolutely great. What do you want to talk about today?
You mentioned, I'm going back a little bit to your so-called personal life. You said that in the beginning you wanted both your husband and your family and friends to go to the Sedona Method course. So is your husband doing releasing as well?
Yeah. So the other day, I did post on the mentorship that I couldn't find my CDs and stuff like that. So I couldn't find my CDs, but I found my workbook. And so here's the thing. This made me laugh so hard. Look at this. I have 3 copies of the workbook.
Wow.
Ridiculous. So one of them is my husband's.
Ah.
From his basic course, and one of them is mine. And then so I did it first, and then my husband did it with a bunch of my friends. Well, our friends. Well, no, they were my friends, and then they became his friends. And he is Katya and Steve. You know, there's some people are just natural releasers.
Sure.
My husband Kirby is one of those. It used to drive me crazy because he's like a duck, right? Like everything just rolls off, right?
How lucky for him.
Oh, well, yeah, lucky for him. Absolutely. And but there's consequences for the people around you when you're such a natural releaser, because nothing sticks to him, and then he marries someone who is this piece around I don't know if you've heard this analogy that men are electrical and women are magnetic. So we walk around, things just stick to us. And with men, like zap, 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 like gone, right? And but consequences is that then I'm the magnetic one, everything sticks to me, so things roll off of him, and that boom, right onto me, right? But hey, it's worked. We're managing our family, and he's very supportive. He actually booked me using points. He flew me out to Bellingham and put me up up there using his points, because he does a lot of traveling, because he knows how critical the Sedona method has been for our family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good description. I would say my husband is a natural releaser as well, though he's been to my courses a few times, but not to anyone else's. But so how does it show in your everyday life? Does he ask you to let go if you are upset about or frustrated about something, or is it just a underground thing going on in the background?
No, he doesn't facilitate me. He's not interested in facilitating anyone. What he's very good at is being with, right? So he shows up as a really great listener, a fantastic supporter, right? And just the presence, and so someone the other day asked me, you hold so much space for other people's healing, who heals you? Where do you go? And I go to my dear one, to my husband, right? To my partner for life. And it's one of those situations, like you talked about past life, sometimes it feels like there's a reason why it was so difficult to get together. And our marriage is so rife with like the worst Chinese story, like Chinese family stories you could ever imagine. Like I am estranged, like our children and him were estranged from his mother, right? Which is like, it's such a sin, right? Like in a patriarchy, like in a filial, in a culture that is so steeped in that, the son is the golden child and all of that. Like I am the evil woman that came between him and his mother, right? So if you look at all of that, you're like, how the hell did we end up together and fight through all of that and still be here? Part of it is because he knows, and he continues to sit in that knowingness. And I am the one who fights it. I am the one who's like, yeah, I see the river and I want to jump into the river, but I want to swim upstream, right? And he's like sitting on the bank going, it's beautiful. Yeah, if you want to jump in, go jump in. And he doesn't have to tell me, go with the flow. he'll just watch me flutter along. And then when I'm ready to kind of be rescued or to kind of talk out about my stupidity and my, all of that, he'll be there. Right. And in terms of our struggles, of course, we have struggles as a couple. What couple doesn't? What relationship doesn't? We're very real about it. Right. Very real about it. And whatever it is, if I need to have a moment to release before I come back, to put the gloves on or whatnot, then I release and come back and put the gloves on, right? In terms of day-to-day, what I appreciate is how much our relationship has evolved over the years. We've known each other since the early 90s, and then we got married in early 2000, right? And from then to now, we have really grown as individuals and also as a couple, and then we've also grown as parents. And yeah, I feel like there's just a level of, what it is, the level of familiarity, but it's not familiarity of me being put in a mold and me putting him in a mold. It's not that kind of familiarity. It's just that there's this level of togetherness that's just very natural.
Intimacy?
Oh, for sure. Like in terms of, but it's sometimes I feel like intimacy, it's like, it's even more deeper than that. And we see this sometimes, some people describe it differently, but it's sort of like there's an ancientness, there's a historyness to the togetherness. Like honestly, sometimes we look at each other, we're like, how boring are we? Because we can just sit and not talk. Like, we can just sit, he's on his Reddit thread, right? And I am like, my audiobook, or I'm planning my video or whatnot, or I'm knitting, crocheting, and we're just sitting there. And I'm like, honey, we both need to get ourselves rockers, like you sit over there and I sit over here. And it's like, we're in our 50s. It's not like, and yet I feel like we're living the lives of, stereotypical, like senior people, right? We're like, yeah, and we're okay with that.
So what? Yeah.
So what? Exactly.
This sounds to me like full acceptance.
Yeah.
There is. And even in moments where there is rejection, because with acceptance will come rejection, lives very real in that space as well. Even when rejection comes in play, I'm finding that over the decades, definitely moving back to acceptance a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Right. And part of that is the me. and as I am growing and as I am changing and as I am dipping back faster into acceptance and love, the world around you changes. It really does. And definitely my marriage is the first place I noticed it. We used to have epic fights. Come on. 3 kids, working people, right? Toronto, we like epic, and we'd be exhausted, right? Now we have different kinds of epic fights, right? But dipping into acceptance a lot quicker. But I know that my propensity to dip back into acceptance, not that there's a here and there, but you know what I mean? Like, being able to kind of just be with is a lot simpler. And life is just simpler lived this way. And even as I am talking to the two of you, what I'm noticing, like if I was doing this, even like, let's say 3 years ago, the need to control and the need for approval, or even the level of, like, let's talk about like the modern science thing, my heart rate would be higher. My blood, like I would feel my heart pounding in my chest. I would feel my knees go soft, right? Because that's how I used to always feel whenever I've done a lot of presentations, but I've always had these really contracted sense of me, right? Whereas
Right.
I'm showing up. I mean, sometimes, Katya, I hear your question before you even ask it, right? And it's been so easy for me. I don't know how it's been for you, but it's just been so bloody effortless. I love it. And I feel like I could do this for days with you too.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you would want that, but
Oh, that's so funny that you said that. We've had this experience with each and every guest, is that once we get to going, then the conversation flows very naturally and very pleasantly so. But there's so much that comes up, isn't there?
There is. We unfortunately we can't go on for for days. I want to ask one more question about the Sedona method and releasing. You said that you sometimes need to go and release or sit back for a while before you put the clothes back on. How do you practice? What's your favorite thing? How you release these days? Is there something favorite questions or ways of getting back to or be the
so
peace that you are?
yeah, for that's a really good question. And I would say that I don't have a favorite tool that I use for myself anymore. It used to be very methodical. It used to be, I would sit down with my workbook, what's my goal? Like I want to, and like you'll be goal process and all of that. I walk my clients through that, but for myself, it's quiet time. Okay. It's sitting down, and I would say if I had to describe my practice, it would be every morning. I get up and I sit here and I face my plants and I wait for the sun to rise. So I'm facing south and the clouds start shifting over here. Okay, the sun is rising on this side. The cloud, the sky starts to change color. And I am just in awe. And as I watch my plants, I love watching how the edges of the plants start and end in terms of the light, right? Sometimes I sit there and I feel like I'm the plant. So it's whatever. It sounds crazy. I know as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh my God, people are going to call you and they're going to tell you you're still psychotic, right? But I'm not. Like, but it's like, how can you be the plant? But I'm like, I am the plant, right? When I am having a really terrible time, I go into nature, I go for hikes, and I just go. If I can't get into to a hike, I go to a local park and I hug a tree. And sometimes if I don't want to be hauled away, or someone calling my husband saying your wife is in the park hugging a tree, come get her, then I kind of do this thing where I hold my phone and I'm leaning on a tree, right? But as I'm leaning on the tree, I feel the pulsation, the life, the nature, the pulsing of life, and look up at the sky and see the clouds. And there's just a way of kind of rooting myself into the ground and feeling the earth's energy, and then just looking up at the sky, and just for whatever reason I disappear. I really feel like I just disappear, and I can come back and okay, give me a problem to solve, because there are many life problems to solve, right? But if I'm stuck, that is my therapy. I recommend it to everybody. Just sort of like, if you want to sit on the ground, touch a tree, and just be with.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful.
I can ask you that there's one little point there that you mentioned, holding a phone. Is that right?
Well,
is that camouflage for the rest of the world, so that at least I'm doing the
so I pretend like, yeah. So I'm like leaning on a tree, right? Like I'm looking like I'm like totally like I'm really hugging the tree, but my arm is around the tree, but I am really hugging the tree. I'm like leaning back on the tree and I'm pretending like I'm reading, but I'm not reading. I am like feeling the tree, being one with the tree. And the resting bitch face is on, so no neighbor comes and chats me up, no interruption, because I have a very severe resting bitch face, right?
Camouflage.
Sort of like,
Perfect.
but what am I doing? I am tuning into the tree, into like just that Mother Nature's pulse, right? And yeah, and I have to stop telling this story because then one of my neighbors overheard me on one of the things that I did locally. And then so now she's like, I saw you in the park hugging the tree, pretending like you're on the phone. Don't you tell me what shut up.
You'll have to find another camouflage.
Hey, anything, it works, right? Because sometimes, like I've got like behind me, I've got mint and some herbs growing, and sometimes like it's making myself a cup of mint tea that like you kind of mush with your own hands, and it's just sometimes you need more than that, right? So find it. I remember one of the calls. Josh was sharing how he's been going to church and how it's been just so phenomenal for him, and then Hale said, the power is when that you can bring the church in you and recognize the church in you, and I really I feel like I'm a practitioner of that. It's just sometimes being in a condominium on the 26th floor. It doesn't matter how many plants I have. It doesn't matter how much of my own herbs I grow and mush. I need to be on the ground, right? And so to just sort of to make that connection and just sort of like it's almost like here's another metaphor, like when we talk about being a shit magnet, that's a really good way to demagnetize, right? Be with Mother Nature and just and it's magic.
Yeah, it is magic. It's the kind of Mother Nature's letting go. It really knows how to do that. Yeah.
That's why I like to work in my garden. I might be doing that after this call.
Yeah.
That has been wonderful, Wei Hin, and thank you for all the sharing. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Well, thank you both, honestly, for making the time for me and just letting me blabber on. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate how open this was. I appreciate the opportunities to notice how personal it can all be. And I appreciated the practice of noticing how it could be about me and yet it's just a story. So yes, there were moments where I was invited to retell my story and there was a story being told, but really what was under all of that was this pervasive sense of just beingness and being with you and being with the people who are going to be watching this later. So thank you for creating this incredible vessel to hold each other.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And there we go.